I never planned to move back home, but sometimes life doesn't wait for permission. When my father passed, I left my job in Phoenix and returned to the house I grew up in to care for my mother. Our neighborhood, Heritage Lakes, still looked like a postcard. Symmetrical lawns, pastel-painted fences, ornamental trees trimmed within an inch of their lives. But beneath the tidy surface, something corrosive had taken root. I saw it the first time I wheeled my mother down the new aluminum ramp we installed on the porch. An older man across the street narrowed his eyes behind binoculars. A teenager pointed at us from behind a curtain. Then, 2 days later, the first letter came. It wasn't a welcome. Violation notice. Unauthorized structural addition. Ramp. You have 10 days to remove. There was no signature. Just the printed name of the Homeowners Association, Heritage Lakes HOA, and the initials KW. Karen Whitlock, president of the HOA. I remembered her. She used to give kids detention as a middle school vice principal before retirement granted her a larger playground. She ran the HOA like a small dictatorship. The bylaws were her constitution, and enforcement was her hobby. To her, a wheelchair ramp wasn't a necessity. It was visual pollution. I responded with calm and documentation. Copies of permits. Letters from my mother's physician. Proof of ADA compliance. I even invited a city inspector to walk the property and confirm everything was above board. He did, and I had his signed report in hand when I attended the next HOA meeting. But when I spoke, Karen never looked up. She sat at the head of the table, surrounded by a few board members who might as well have been garden statues. Her gavel hit the desk after my final sentence. Denied, she said simply. The bylaws prohibit exterior modifications without prior approval. You didn't wait for approval. I followed the law, I replied. Your approval is irrelevant. Karen smiled like a lioness who smelled weakness. This is a community, she said, not a charity. From that moment on, it wasn't about the ramp. It was about power. We tried to ignore it. Letters became weekly. One accused us of storing hazardous medical equipment in the backyard, referring to a small oxygen tank housed in a weatherproof container. Another warned that our mailbox was slightly off-center, a claim I debunked with a measuring tape and photograph. Still, the warnings piled up like falling leaves, none enforceable, all intended to pressure. Then came the day I woke up to find the chain. It was early, just after dawn. I stepped out to check the mail and froze. A thick industrial chain had been wrapped through the spokes of my mother's wheelchair lift and looped around the side railing. It gleamed with fresh metal polish and was locked with not one but 2 heavy-duty padlocks. Attached to it was a laminated orange sign, Property Violation, Equipment Disabled Until Review. By order of Heritage Lakes HOA. I dropped the mail, ran back inside. Mom, I shouted. Are you okay? She was sitting at the top of the ramp, wrapped in her shawl, eyes wet and hands trembling. She'd been outside trying to get fresh air when she realized the lift wouldn't work. She couldn't descend the ramp on her own, not without risking a fall. Her voice cracked. I thought I was trapped. She was. I called the HOA. Straight to voicemail. I left 5 messages. Nothing. Then I called the city. They were furious, said the HOA had no legal authority to disable medical access. They told me to document everything and file a formal complaint. But I knew what that meant. Weeks of paperwork. Delays. Bureaucracy. We didn't have weeks. My mother's appointments were scheduled. Her care required movement. That's when I noticed something odd about the HOA signpost near our street. One of the decorative birdhouses nailed to it had a tiny lens poking through the bottom. A camera, poorly hidden, clearly active. I took photos. Of the chain. The sign. The birdhouse. That night, I emailed everything to my uncle. He wasn't just family. He was a retired FBI field agent who had worked white-collar crime for 20 years. I hadn't talked to him much since my dad's funeral, but now I needed his experience. His reply was short. I've seen this before. Document everything. Do not engage directly. I'll make a call. I didn't know what he meant.
Not yet.
The next day, My mother refused to leave her room. She felt humiliated, powerless. "This is my home," she whispered, not looking at me. "I paid for it with your father for 40 years. I won't be a prisoner here." I sat beside her, holding her hand. I wanted to scream. Instead, I made a promise. "They think this is over," I told her. "But they have no idea who they just chained down." Outside, I heard the low hum of a car idling for too long, then driving away slowly. Watching. Karen and the HOA thought they'd won. But someone else was watching too. And they weren't from the neighborhood. The next morning, my mother still wouldn't speak to me. She sat at the kitchen table in silence, the sunlight barely warming her pale skin. Her hands trembled faintly as she tried to sip her tea. I watched the steam rise, feeling my chest tighten. Karen had done more than chain a lift. She'd stolen my mother's sense of safety. I made breakfast in silence, trying to pretend it was just another day. But inside, something had changed. I'd stopped being afraid of Karen. Now I was angry. By noon, the city finally sent an officer to photograph the chained lift and issue a cease and desist to the HOA. I handed him all the documents, pictures, and video clips I'd taken, including the footage of Karen herself, pacing outside our house 2 nights prior. "She's escalating," I told him. He nodded grimly. "And she's not the only one. We've had 5 other complaints this year, 2 involving disabled residents." That chilled me. "Can you do anything more?" His answer was careful. "Our hands are tied without a formal investigation. But someone higher up might take an interest. You said you had family in federal service?" I nodded. "Keep gathering evidence. Something tells me she's crossed more lines than you know." That night, I found the locks cut. The chain was gone. No note. No apology. Just the silence of someone trying to erase their crime. But it wasn't over. That same evening, 3 uniformed HOA volunteers knocked on our door. They claimed they were conducting a community safety inspection. One of them, a stocky man with a clipboard, tried to push past me into the house. I blocked the door. "You're not coming in." He smirked. "The HOA has a right to inspect non-compliant residences." I lifted my phone and hit record. "You try stepping through this door, and the only thing you'll inspect is the inside of a courtroom." They backed off, but slowly, like predators marking territory. My mother watched from her bedroom window, her face pale. "This isn't about rules anymore," she whispered. "It's about control." She was right. Karen wasn't trying to enforce order. She was trying to break us. That's when the real storm began. The following morning, our water bill spiked 500%. A city technician confirmed someone had tampered with our line. The next day, trash collection mysteriously skipped our house. The next, a false complaint was filed against us for excessive noise and loitering. I knew who it was. Every single time. Karen was turning the system against us, weaponizing the rules she claimed to uphold. I sent everything to my uncle. 2 hours later, he called. "You're not just dealing with an HOA gone rogue," he said, his voice low and firm. "You're dealing with someone who thinks they're untouchable. But no one is. Not really." I could almost hear the wheels turning in his mind. I made some calls. "Your HOA president? She's under quiet scrutiny already. Misuse of funds. Possible fraud. Now, with what you've sent, there's cause to dig deeper. A task force has been watching." My heart skipped. "You're saying—" "Yes. Keep collecting. Keep pushing. But let her think you're scared. Let her overreach." The plan was dangerous, but it made sense. People like Karen always trip over their own arrogance. All I had to do was endure. That week, I filed 2 formal ADA violation complaints. I posted photos of the chained lift and HOA letters online, anonymously. It didn't take long for the local press to start sniffing. Karen panicked. She began calling emergency HOA meetings, changing bylaws overnight, and sending mass emails to residents claiming we were slandering the community and bringing in dangerous elements. The irony? We hadn't done half of what she accused us of. But one night, I caught a break. I returned home late and spotted a sedan parked down the street, one I'd seen more than once. I approached cautiously, phone in hand. The driver rolled down the window. "Don't worry," he said calmly, showing me a badge. "FBI. We're watching her," he said. "And thanks to you, we're very close." "Watching her for what?" I asked. "Misappropriation of HOA funds, harassment, impersonating municipal authority, possibly even surveillance law violations. She's made a lot of enemies, but most were too scared to talk." I stared at him, half in disbelief. "Why now?" He smiled faintly. "Because you weren't." I stood there as he drove off, headlights vanishing into the dark. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. Karen had built her kingdom out of fear. But now, she was being watched by something far bigger than she could control. And she didn't know it yet. I thought the worst was behind us. I was wrong. After the mysterious FBI visit, I tried to live normally, if normal meant dodging HOA volunteers armed with clipboards and smartphones. The air around our house grew thicker with paranoia. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Some whispered apologies in passing. Others just turned their backs. Karen's grip had become less about rules and more about fear. That week, Mom had her quarterly checkup at the VA hospital downtown. I wheeled her out, heart pounding, eyes scanning every street corner. I hadn't forgotten the last time, the chain, the humiliation. But the lift worked. And for a moment, there was peace. Until we got back. A white HOA-issued sticker had been slapped across our front door. Notice: dwelling under review for community compliance. Do not alter or remove this notice. I peeled it off without hesitation, adrenaline spiking. Beneath the sticker, a thin crack had formed around the doorframe, like someone had tried to pry it open. I called the police. Again. This time, the responding officer, new to the beat, seemed less tolerant of Karen's games. He filed a formal report. I gave him everything. And as he left, he looked back at me and said, "You know, off the record, this isn't a community. It's a controlled environment. And someone's about to lose control." The next day, Karen showed her hand. I was taking out the trash when 2 city workers rolled up in a municipal van and told me they were there to inspect hazardous medical waste disposal on the property. I blinked. "What medical waste?" "Anonymous tip," they said. I led them around the house. They found nothing. Obviously. One of them pulled me aside. "This happens a lot," he said, voice low. "HOAs think they're God. But we're keeping a list. Yours is near the top now." I nodded. I was keeping a list, too. That night, I sent my uncle another batch of documents, forged notices, complaints, emails from residents that bore strikingly similar language to Karen's. The FBI was compiling a case. They just needed the final nudge. The kind that left fingerprints. And Karen was about to leave plenty. It happened 2 days later. I came home from a supply run and found my mother sobbing in her wheelchair. The lift wasn't broken this time, but the ramp itself had been sawed halfway through. Just beneath the 3rd plank, someone had weakened the wood. A foot placed too firmly would have snapped through. A fall like that could have killed her. Rage burned through me. I grabbed my phone, opened the neighborhood surveillance app, and scoured every posted video clip from that morning. Then I found it. Blurry, early morning footage. Karen herself, pacing across our front lawn. Something heavy in her hand. She wasn't alone. 2 board members flanked her, holding what looked like tools wrapped in towels. She had come back to finish what she started. I sent the footage to the task force email my uncle had given me. No filters. No edits. Just raw evidence. I didn't care any more about retaliation. Let her come. Let her try. I was waiting. And the storm finally arrived. The next evening, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting, open to all residents. She sent flyers door to door, titled, "Crisis at Heritage Lakes, Defending Our Neighborhood from Legal Saboteurs." We showed up. Not because we were welcome, but because it was time. The community center was packed. Folding chairs lined every wall. Karen stood at the front wearing her signature pink suit, pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She pointed to us as we walked in. "There they are," she shouted, voice full of venom. The ones poisoning this community with lies, with lawsuits, with false accusations.
Gasps.
Murmurs. I kept my face calm, my mother steady in her chair beside me. You chained down a disabled woman, I said clearly. You tampered with city infrastructure. You lied to your own board. Karen slammed her gavel. You're out of order. A few people stood confused. One neighbor, a retired teacher, spoke up. I saw her son replacing the broken ramp this morning. Why would he fix a hazard if he made it up? Another stood. You fine me for putting a prayer mat outside. Said it was visual clutter. Then another. You shut down the Little League fundraiser for not using pre-approved signs. One by one, voices rose. The cracks in her empire widened. Karen's face flushed with rage. This is mutiny. And that's when they entered. 3 people in suits. Badges flashing.
FBI.
Karen froze. We'd like to speak with Karen Whitlock privately, one agent said. Please step outside with us. She stuttered. This is an HOA meeting. I'm in the middle of official business. The agent didn't blink.
Yes.
And now, so are we. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Karen walked out, her heels clicking like ticking clocks. The doors closed behind her. I exhaled. The room sat stunned. No one moved. Then someone clapped. Then another. And another.
Not for me.
Not for revenge. For freedom. The air in the neighborhood shifted after the FBI led Karen out of that meeting. For the first time in years, Heritage Lakes wasn't holding its breath. But I was. Justice doesn't come in a single knock. It builds, brick by brick, lie by lie, until it can't be ignored. Over the next week, residents whispered about what the agents asked, who else was questioned, and what kind of files they carried out of the HOA office. The boardroom, once Karen's personal fortress, was locked and sealed with red tape that read, "Under federal investigation." No more surprise finds. No more veiled threats. And no more fear. I kept quiet. I still had questions. Why now? Why not sooner? And most of all, how deep did this all go? That's when my uncle called. Listen, he said, his voice a mix of triumph and gravity. It wasn't just the chaining incident or the harassment. Karen's been under surveillance for almost a year. Money laundering through community fines. Kickbacks from shady property developers. Wire fraud. That video you sent? That's what tipped it over. It proved intent. I sat on our porch, stunned. Mom rested beside me, bundled in a blanket, watching the sparrows dart across the yard. We're not done, my uncle added. But she is. 2 weeks later, Karen's face made the evening news. Local, then national. HOA president arrested in federal sting operation. They showed stock footage of her smiling at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, her voice echoing through archive clips about protecting property values and preserving community character. But then the anchor's tone shifted, listing charges that sounded more like a Netflix crime thriller than neighborhood governance.
Fraud.
Conspiracy. Elder abuse. Federal civil rights violations. And the footage? They aired it. The moment she ordered her board to chain down my mother's wheelchair. A whistleblower from the HOA leaked it. She hadn't known the boardroom had been upgraded with audio surveillance, paid for with misused reserve funds. It was Karen's voice. Her words. If she can't follow the rules, make her stay still. 6 seconds of pure villainy. And it was all the world needed. Within days, more victims came forward. Seniors bullied out of their homes. Veterans fined into foreclosure. Single mothers reported for unauthorized gatherings during birthday parties. The entire HOA board resigned in disgrace. And then, something I never expected happened. The city stepped in. A temporary council was appointed to oversee Heritage Lakes. Neutral. Transparent. They tore up half the old bylaws and replaced them with real protections, especially for the disabled, elderly, and vulnerable. We weren't just cleaning house. We were rebuilding it. And in the middle of it all, something beautiful grew. Neighbors who had once peered through blinds now stood on each other's porches. The woman across the street brought fresh cornbread to Mom every Saturday. The retired teacher offered to tutor kids for free in her garage. Someone organized a block party without a permit. No one shut it down. I even caught a group of teenagers repainting the curb numbers voluntarily. It felt alive. I knew not everything would be perfect. Karen's kind of damage leaves scars. But for once, those scars could breathe. One morning, a white SUV pulled into our driveway. My uncle stepped out, flanked by 2 federal agents. Mom's eyes widened. I helped her to the door as they approached. "Got something for you," my uncle said. He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside were legal documents, a settlement, not from Karen, but from the HOA's misused emergency fund, which the court had frozen and redistributed. It wasn't millions, but it was enough. Enough to install a permanent, weatherproof wheelchair ramp. Enough to buy a second-hand van with a lift. Enough to secure a home made for Mom, so I could finally breathe. Enough to start over. "I think you saved more than just your mother," my uncle said. "You reminded people what happens when one voice speaks loud enough." I looked at Mom, her eyes shining. "No," I said. "She saved herself. I just made sure the world heard her scream." That night, I sat on the porch again. Same spot. Same breeze. But everything felt different. The porch light across the street flicked on. The neighbor waved. And for the first time in a long time, I waved back. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had justice.
And peace.
But just in case, I kept the chain she'd been bound with, hung it on the porch wall, not as a trophy, but as a warning. For the next Karen who thinks rules mean power.